This screencast is to support this lesson. It's Lesson 6 from Language to Go Pre-Intermediate by G. Cunningham and S. Mohammed and published by Longman. Here, there's a few things you're going to need. Here's the students page. And you've got the teacher's book notes here, some really useful notes on the language in this particular lesson as well, so do have a look at that. Remember that for Language to Go, there are some additional controlled practice tasks for each lesson. You'll find this on Teams under class materials, and just scroll down to find lesson number 6. Okay, I'll come back to that later. Also on Teams you're going to find the grammar reference. Again, it's for the whole book and we're looking at lesson 6 here, and that gives you a good idea of the level of detail that pre-intermediate students need in terms of the form and the meaning of this particular grammar item. So let's go back to the material here and have an overview. So I think the main aim of this material is to introduce and practice going to for use for future plans, and there's a sub-aim of developing reading skills and a sub-aim of introducing country names. Okay, so that's a general overview, and let's have a look at how we could start the lesson. So the general topic is about travel with English, and here we have a task to focus on country names and the pronunciation of them and the stress patterns. So lots of different ways you could start, really. I mean, I'd probably start by saying, can you tell me any countries in the world where people speak English, and try to elicit those countries. And then you could say, okay, well, let me remind me of what your countries are, and check the students' countries and countries that they've lived in. And then while you're doing that, you could be drilling those and eliciting where the stress is in those words, and that will lead with a nice flow to the next activity. The way the book does it is that the students listen and then put each country into the right column. Okay, you can do that if you like, no problem, but make sure before they start listening that you've clarified these different patterns here and that students know what they mean. Then they could listen and write down the countries they hear in the correct column. When the listening is finished, get them to check together, talk together, and then go through as a class and do some drilling. Try wherever possible to drill without them reading the words from the screen. So if possible, elicit all the answers and then maybe turn off the screen and drill some of the countries. But just try as hard as you can to have them not looking at the written form when you're drilling. It does interfere with the pronunciation. I've skipped over this first part here. I think that's because I'm really terrible at identifying continents, but there's no reason not to include it if you want to. I'm just a little bit concerned that maybe the reading might need a bit more time, and I feel like this very first activity is a little bit superfluous. Maybe you could show a map on there and try to elicit the different continents. That's something else that you could start the lesson with. And then we're going to move on to do some reading. So what is the first stage of a good receptive skills lesson? You need to raise interest and background knowledge in the topic so that the students have their schematic knowledge activated so they're ready to meet the text. So what we've got here is a lovely picture of the writer with a backpack on and the title Dream Holiday. So I'll probably show that first and say, well, what do you think this reading's going to be about? What do you think, who is this woman? What is the dream holiday? Just try to get them interested and intrigued about what they're going to read. And the next stage of a successful receptive skills lesson might be to pre-teach any blocking vocabulary. So any vocabulary that's going to get in the way of either general understanding of the text or of the task or tasks that the students are going to do. So here's the task here, this box, and they're going to have to read the first time and see when to visit and then what to see and do. So there might be some activities here in the text that the students may not know that we need to pre-teach. So if we have a look for that, I usually have a little look through, think, right, if I'm doing this task, what am I going to need to write down? Well, water sports is jumping out at me, so I think that's going to need pre-teaching. Maybe safari as well. I think that's quite an international word, but even so, I think safari would be a good idea. Coastline or coast as well, I think would be good. How many have we got so far? That's 3. We don't really want more than 6, so let's see what else we've got. Monuments. I think that could be quite a useful word for people going sightseeing. And what else do we have here in the one about Canada? Oh, it's got Inuits. Good Lord. Gosh, that's a tricky word, isn't it? I think we're going to have to pre-teach that, but make sure the students know that it's not a particularly useful word, but it is. They need to use it today for the text. And I think in that last one, I think the word sweater can often be unknown. So I would teach that one. I think we've got 6 there. So you've got an option on how you're going to pre-teach them. You can give the students, show the students some pictures or tell them a little story, and then try to elicit the word from them. Okay, so you can show a picture of a jumper or a sweater and then try to elicit the word sweater. Okay, show them pictures of different water sports, try to elicit the words water sports. Or the other option is to have a matching task. So you've got the 6 vocab items down one side of the page, 6 pictures or simple definitions on the other side of the page, and get the students to match them together. Okay, always do the first one together as an example. But in feedback from that, you'll want to check meaning and drill any ones that are useful. So don't drill Inuits. They just need to know that they're the native people from Canada. But there's other useful words that I probably would drill, like sweater and monuments. Okay, so decide on whether you're going to drill or not based on how useful that item is going to be, or whether they're going to use it later on in the lesson. As you know, we've got the task here on the side. I would suggest dividing it into 2 separate tasks so that the first task is easier and encourages faster reading, and the second task is more complex. So first I would just show the countries and when to visit and ask the students to write that down on a piece of paper. Give them some time to write it down and then show them the text and say, right, I want you to read and decide when to visit each of these places. Okay, give them a time limit, 2 minutes, I think should do it. And then get them to peer check afterwards, talk together about their answers so that you can gauge the success or otherwise of the activity and decide if you need to give them a little bit more time. Then do the feedback. And then I would move on to the more complex task, set this task here, elicit the example of Australia rather than just giving it to them, and then say, right, that's the example. Now you do the same thing for South Africa, India, Canada and Ireland. Give them a chance to do this by themselves. Reading is a solo activity. You can always say, you know, feel free, ask me, no, not feel free, that would be crazy grading. You could say, ask if there's any vocabulary you need to know, ask me. Just so that they feel that they can approach you and ask you a question during the task. Again, at the end, peer checking so you can gauge success, and then class feedback, which is going to need to be visual. They need to see the answers to this particular task. So there are 2 reasons why we've done that reading. One, it's to develop the students' receptive skills of reading. And the second is to provide a context for what's coming next. So here's the grammar focus. It's going to for plans. And there are loads of examples of this target language in the positive and negative form in the text. So that's where our examples are going to come from. So just to review some good staging on a language stage, a clarification stage or a presentation stage, whatever you want to call it, you want to start with examples from a context. Okay. And then you want to move on to look at meaning. And there's 2 parts to that, I would say. So the first part of that is conveying meaning. That means looking at the examples together, talking about those. And then the second stage to meaning is checking meaning. So that might mean some CCQs. Timelines, I think, are going to be really useful here too. So a way of checking meaning. And then you're going to want to go on to elicit the form and then focus on pronunciation. I have to say, pronunciation can be moved around. It doesn't have to go in that order. You could, as long as it's coming after meaning has been established, that's okay. All right, so you could do it before the form, after the form. You could do it later, after the control practice task. As long as it comes after meaning, that'll be fine. As I say, there are lots of examples of the target language in the text, but you've only got a couple here in the box. So more, please. One example of each is not enough. So 2 or 3 of the positive form and 2 or 3 of the negative form is what I would put on a slide first, and then I would convey the meaning. So I would say, she says, I'm going to spend a month in India. So who's talking there? Oh, it's the travel writer. Yes, it's her. Yeah. Has she planned to spend the month in India? Is it 100% sure that she's going to India? Yeah, it is, because she's got this trip planned. Yeah, so you talk a little bit more about the context and ask some questions pretty much similar to concept checking questions to guide the students into the meaning. Then I think it would be a good idea to show a timeline, because the key thing here is not just that these things happen in the future, it's that they are plans. And if they're plans, that means they've been decided before the speaker is speaking. All right, so you need to show that on a timeline, that the decision is before now, that now is when the speaker is speaking, and that the thing happens in the future. And you're going to need 2 or 3 nice concept questions to go with that, really to consolidate meaning. The future is a nightmare in English. There are so many ways of doing it, and students often think that will is the only way, or that going to is the only way. They've often learnt weird things like will is close future and going to is far future, which is not a thing at all. So you've really got to get the concept right, otherwise they'll get very confused. Okay, and be prepared for questions about will and how you're going to deal with those. So anticipate problems of meaning. Form is to be elicited, really. Look, you've got different parts to it. It's be plus going to plus the base verb, instead of saying it's be plus going plus the full infinitive with to. Okay, so it's be plus going to plus base verb. Be plus not plus going to plus base verb. All right, elicit that from the examples from this to the students. Don't call I'm going present continuous. It isn't. It's just called be plus going to plus base verb. It's the going to future. It doesn't have another name. All right, and then a bit of drilling, lovely natural drilling in short sentences, focusing on the key aspects of pronunciation. Watch out for what happens to that too. And if you want to drill gonna, I'm going to visit, I'm going to spend, totally fine by me, because they're going to hear it out in the real world, as long as they know that gonna means going to. Okay, so 2 ways to say it: I'm going to spend or I'm gonna spend. You need control practice next. Here is a lovely gap fill, so you could go with that. And here in the additional control practice tasks, which you'll find on Teams, there are some additional ones for a bit of variation. You've got some pictures here. You could put those up on screen and elicit the sentences, or you could do this part here, which will lead them towards the next task where they might use because later on in the lesson. Okay, so I would, if you're going to use you could use the pictures and the gap fill, but I wouldn't use the pictures and the sentence thing and the gap fill, because you want to get on to the freer practice. Lovely activity here. Think carefully about how you're going to stage it. I would suggest saying to the students, I'm going to give you lots and lots of money. I want you to plan a holiday around the world, and then maybe have a slide with different countries on it, different things to do, and then say to the students, right, look at this, choose 2 places that you'd like to go to and decide why, and give them time to do that alone, and then get them to talk as a group. Put someone in charge and say, right, talk together, where do you want to go and why, and then in the feedback, then they tell you where they're going and why, and at that final stage they're using going to, because they've made those plans. Okay, so think carefully about how you're going to stage this task.